This is the SAU Report, a program featuring interviews with the faculty, staff, students, and alumni of Southern Arkansas University in Magnolia.
Welcome to this special Campaign 98 edition of the SAU Report. I'm Lisa Stegall.
And I'm Amanda Black. With us today is a very special guest, Betty Dickey, the Republican candidate for Attorney General. Ms. Dickey made history in 1994 when she was elected the first woman to be elected prosecuting attorney in the state of Arkansas. Welcome.
Good morning, Lisa. Good morning, Amanda.
Well, you've certainly held many posts throughout your career. You've been a city attorney, you've been an attorney for the Soil and Water Commission, a prosecuting attorney. Was all this a build-up to become the next Attorney General?
No, it was not. I was not trying to look for a higher office at the time. I had just announced a re-election campaign for prosecuting attorney when I was approached by both political parties, actually. And they asked me to run for state offices, and I refused the first few times because I was in the middle of prosecuting a case in Lonoke County as a special prosecutor. Excuse me, I felt that case would take most of 1998, and I had made a commitment to do that. Eventually, and actually in February, that case was concluded, and so I agreed to run for Attorney General, and have really enjoyed it.
Have there been any special challenges that you faced as being one of the first women prosecuting attorneys in Arkansas?
Well, I think it was initially a little hard because they had, in the campaign in 1994, they had said, well, a woman cannot do that job. But as you both well know, in many areas where women are breaking the barrier as far as gender, they are accepted as being able to do the job. And after 6 months or so, there was no problem. There has not been a problem. I have gone on homicide calls just like the male prosecutors do, and I have had to make some hard decisions. I've tried death penalty cases. I have tried cases including the one I mentioned of the pedophile in Lonoke County, a Boy Scout leader. And I've had to try some cases that were very challenging. But I have been accepted no longer as a woman trying to do a man's job, but as someone who can do the job. In 1997, the Attorney General named me a top prosecutor because of my work with crime victims, and so it's really been encouraging the way both my fellow prosecutors and the public has accepted me.
So you feel that these challenges have really prepared you for the challenges of Attorney General?
Well, I think so. The first challenge was as a mother. I was prepared for some of the challenges that you face. I have 4 children and a foster child, and trying to deal with some of those problems that children face or that children need as far as protection is something that is, both as a prosecutor and as Attorney General, I think are important. Protecting the vulnerable, whether it's the elderly or the children, is a very important part of that office. It was a very important part. It's been a very important part of what I do as a prosecutor.
You mentioned earlier that you had been approached by both political parties to seek the office or a statewide office. And many know Betty Dickey as a Democrat, but you signed on with the Republican Party. Is that going to be a hindrance or a help? Will you just bring all the Democrats that were your previous supporters into the fold with you as this Republican candidate, or how's that going to be a challenge, if any?
Well, you've asked several questions, but let me address as many as I can remember. The two-party system is healthy for this state, as any state, and it's good that each party feels its best candidate and that people have a choice. And so I think there is a choice presented here between not just 2 political parties, but between a prosecutor and a politician, or someone with experience and someone with not as much experience, a male and a female, if that matters to someone. So I think there are some distinct choices here, but my decision to change parties came because I had been characterized by the head of a party as being pro-choice. And as I said, and I have 4 children, adopted the first child. I have a foster child in addition to those 4. And I am very strongly pro-life and very strongly against partial birth abortions. And so this forced me to look at what both parties stood for. And I realized that I'm more conservative. I'm strong as far as crime prosecution, fiscally conservative, and pro-life. And I think that better describes me and the way I had been voting for the last few years. So I vote for the conservative candidate. Quite often that is a Republican. And it was not a hard transition. And some of my friends still support me because they know I'm the better candidate. It only matters to people, just as gender in public office only matters to people who are sexist. I think a political party only matters to people who don't look at the total person and what they bring to a race. And so I don't think that's a problem. It ought not be a plus or a minus.
Thank you.
Mark Pryor has touted his law firm's experience in environmental issues and consumer protection issues as something that will better prepare him for being Attorney General. What experiences do you have that will help you in those issues?
In environmental?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I was the commission attorney for the Arkansas Soil and Water Conservation Commission, and as such worked with farmers and worked on environmental concerns for those years that I worked in state office. I also have run a law office, and I think the administrative skills that I developed in building a prosecutor's office and in managing 20 to 30 people helps, because basically the Attorney General is an administrator, runs programs that there are 8 divisions, 5 of which deal with criminal matters, and I have a wealth of experience in the criminal justice area. My opponent has apparently never tried a criminal case nor never tried a jury trial, and so I bring to it the experience, more civil experience than he's had. More experience in protecting, as far as consumer protection, in protecting the individual and not protecting large businesses. I bring to that the commitment to protect victims or potential victims of crime. That's why I was named the top prosecutor. That has been an extension of motherhood, an extension of the prosecutor's office, taking to the Attorney General's office that commitment to protect, as I said, those people who are vulnerable, those people who are elderly, who need protection as far as nursing home violations, the financial abuse of institutions that don't protect them as far as their money, telemarketer scams, people who would abuse them because they have money and are naive. And then on the other end of the spectrum, protecting children from pedophiles and from sexual predators. Identifying sex offenders and tracking them is something the Attorney General's office can do. It's something that I have had to do as a prosecutor. So I think I bring a whole lot of experience from being a prosecutor, working in the city attorney's office, in 2 city attorneys, in 2 cities as city attorneys, and then the environmental protection as far as Arkansas Soil and Water Conservation Commission. So it's a variety of experience.
Well, as you know, every 10 years reapportionment occurs, and it's that time again, and many are watching this particular race because they feel that it could have a large impact on how the voting districts are redrawn. And I'm wondering, what is your opinion about this discussion, and how do you see that developing?
The only reason that redistricting is important is because it was not done fairly in 1990, after the 1990 census. And for those who do not know, there are 3 people who redistrict as far as the legislative, the senatorial, and the representative state districts. The governor, the Secretary of State, and the Attorney General. And because the districts were gerrymandered based on not protecting a political party as much as protecting the incumbent, Columbia County was gerrymandered into several districts. In Camden, in Ouachita County, that was also gerrymandered into several districts, into more than one district. Where I grew up in Lawrence County, it was gerrymandered. It was divided up into several districts to protect the incumbent. In fact, in Little Rock in Pulaski County, a district was redrawn to protect my opponent and his incumbency in the legislature. Senator Bill Walker complained that my opponent's district was drawn so he would not face an incumbent. And I think that's wrong. If we face voter apathy, as it appears we do, part of it is because people don't know who their representatives are or where the lines are. And I think in fairness to the people of the state, they ought to be drawn along either natural boundaries or county lines. That's the only reason that this part of the Attorney General's race is significant, because it wasn't fair in the past. It wasn't fair, as I said, to Columbia County and many other counties, and it ought to be done fairly and in a nonpartisan manner.
In the past, it seemed that the more a candidate spent on his campaign, the more likely he or she was to win. Do you think that there should be some campaign reforms on financing and that sort of thing?
Absolutely. I think that there need to be there need to be campaign reforms in the area of financing campaigns, because it costs so much to run. Even this campaign, it'll cost between $500,000 and $1 million to run the Attorney General's campaign, and the yearly salary is $55,000 a year. It's unfortunate that it takes so much money, and that means obviously only those people who accumulate a lot of money, who are wealthy, or it means that the wealthy will select the candidate if we don't face some campaign finance reform. It shouldn't take millions of dollars. It ought to be done in a fairer manner.
You've been named one of the top prosecutors. However, the Democrat Gazette recently has been grabbing headlines and pointing out that there were some instances where the speedy trial rule hadn't been followed. For the benefit of our viewers who may only hear a soundbite, could you explain to them maybe what those reports were and what occurred?
Yes, and it is a problem that every prosecutor in the state deals with, fighting speedy trial problems. And it's unfortunate because the prosecutors don't serve the warrants and they don't set the trials generally. Judges do that. And at least in our district they do now. In some districts the prosecutors are allowed to control the trial docket, but not in ours. In addition to the regular crime that I have in my area, which is Jefferson and Lincoln County, in Pine Bluff and Star City, I also have the prison crime in my area. I prosecute, or I'm responsible for prosecuting any criminal acts that occur in the prisons throughout the state. And so I have basically twice the challenge that other prosecutors face. I succeeded a prosecutor who had not tried cases himself in the last nearly 10 years. And there had no grants for drug prosecutions, no victim witness programs, so I literally built an office and faced immediately speedy trial problems that continued. And 3 of those cases to which the Democrat Gazette referred were cases that involved, in one instance, a case where a judge had not set the case for 265 out of the allowed 365 days. And so we immediately had problems when the first trial setting was delayed so long, and then when they were allowed so many resettings, and finally we'd prepared for trial twice. The judge was very seriously ill. The defense attorney had indicated he would not raise a speedy trial problem, and unfortunately a deputy believed him without getting that reduced to writing. The case coordinator did not reset it, the judge's case coordinator, and so this case was lost because of speedy trial. The man had been already out for a year and a half. So he was not in jail. Faced a manslaughter conviction. The other 2 cases were prison cases. One of those, the man, instead of pleading to a second life without, he's serving only 1 life without. So he is still in prison for the rest of his life. The other one is in prison until 2022. So he's in prison for a very long time. But those are cases that my fellow prosecutors, when they face them, sometimes have to null-pros them or have them dismissed because they face speedy trial problems. We tried until the very last to get those set, and unfortunately they weren't. That's a daily battle that we fight. We deal with about 3,000 cases a year. These are 3 of the cases. It is still unfortunate. We fight crises like this, though, on a daily basis. It would not be as significant were it not for a political campaign in which a prosecutor's running. It also is not nearly as big a problem for us as what we're facing, especially with the downsizing of DHS, of letting people who have mental problems and who have killed and yet are incompetent to stand trial, allowing them to return to our community. That is a more real and a more serious problem that we face. That's at this point not newsworthy. It will be when one of those people kills someone again. But at this point, you know, we had an Easter afternoon homicide where a woman walked up in a random shootings and killed 2 people at a busy intersection in Pine Bluff, and she's just been found incompetent to stand trial. And so the next dilemma is, what do we do with her, and how can I protect my community from having them turn her out and release her back into the community? Another one you may have seen was a young man named Sean Hintz, who in what was widely televised, because they actually could televise him as he was trying to drown his nephew near Alzheimer. And 2 of the sheriff's deputies paddled out in a boat to try to get him to release the infant as he was holding it under the water. They shot him in the shoulder. They hit him with a boat motor to try to get him to release the baby. That man was then let back out to return to the community. Having been ordered never to be around this child again, he was released by the Mental Health Division of the Department of Human Services to come back into the community. So we face so many crises every day, and not just ours, but every prosecutor's office. You know, you can pick any day and come down there and see that we're dealing with either trying to stop a homicide before a domestic violence incident escalates into one, or stopping the molesting of children by stepfathers or relatives within the homes, trying to keep mental patients, 9/11s as they're called, committed. So this is just one of the many problems that we face, trying to keep people whom we are trying to revoke as far as their probation and get them back into prison. It is a struggle that as prosecutors we face all the time.
Could there be any solution to the backed-up court system?
Yes. There are a lot of people who work in the court system, not just the prosecutors and the sheriffs, and some of the judges who know that there's a problem, probation officers and parole officers, and people in DHS who deal with the 9/11s know that there need to be better laws. In the area of juvenile justice, there needs to be a reforming of the juvenile code. So there are a lot of things that can be done. We'll face changing the juvenile code when the legislature convenes in early 1999, in which they will lower the age at which we can try a juvenile for capital murder. I faced that, a 13-year-old who had killed a UAPB student for a moon pie and 50 cents, and he faced only a few years in DYS, Department of Youth Services, before as the young men who go on trial today, before he'll be let out. So that's a problem, but it's also a problem as far as setting cases for trial. And if there is a mandatory, as there is in federal court, if there is a mandatory setting of 120 days where a judge has to set cases, then we'll be better served, and the people of the state will be better served. If they will not allow repeated resettings or if they will require that a defense attorney or the defendant is on record requesting a resetting before they will allow it, then we won't face the problems where defense attorneys lie in wait for an ambiguous record so that they can get their clients off. To many of them, it's a game. To those of us who try to prosecute violent criminals, who try to protect those of you in the state from violent criminals, it's not a game, but it is a problem that several of us know need to be revised.
Well, switching gears just a little bit, the Ethics Commission in Arkansas has been making news when it has sanctioned different elected officials and when it was sanctioned in the form of a lawsuit. If elected as Attorney General, what role do you think that the Ethics Commission should play in Arkansas politics?
Well, I think the Ethics Commission has served a useful purpose as far as forcing elected officials to conform to rules and regulations, as far as the way they conduct their race, as far as their reporting, as far as where they take the contributions. I think they've done a good job. Bob Brooks has worked hard to serve the people of the state as the director of the Ethics Commission.
Many Arkansans right now are concerned with, as you mentioned, the Department of Youth Services. We've had some reports about the abuse within those. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, we need to punish juveniles and hold them accountable when they commit adult crimes, and many of them should be tried as adults. I think we're going to have to lower the age to, hopefully, like 28 other states, no minimum age. The Criminal Justice Commission has recommended that be lowered to age 10. So we need to revise that code, and particularly as it deals with youthful offenders who commit violent crimes. And they need to be held past 18 if they're tried as juveniles. But that doesn't mean that when incarcerated they should be abused. Part of the reason that they're violent and abusive is because of the way they've been treated as children. You know, they can be rehabilitated, they can be taught or retrained and still yet be held accountable, but they should not be abused by the system, and that apparently was the case at DYS.
On average, an opinion from the Attorney General's office takes about 90 days. Do you feel that this time period is too long, and what would the turnaround be in, say, a Dickey administration?
Well, I think that time period is too long. With 70 attorneys, or approximately 70 attorneys, and a support staff of about 60 other people, I think that the turnaround should be, much more rapid than that. We can, through the prosecuting attorney's office, through the prosecutor coordinator's office, or PCO as it's called, get Attorney General opinions and get basically a turnaround in a day or two. And I think that, yes, with Dickey as Attorney General, you'll get a faster turnaround than 90 days.
Thank you.
I think we could safely say right now that public sentiment towards government is at an all-time low. Do you feel that you would be able to restore Arkansans' faith in government?
Yes, and one of the ways, as I mentioned, is to redraw the lines so it's fair, so that people become more aware of who their senators and state representatives are. That's more inclusive. But as Attorney General, I would expect, yes, I have a reputation for being honest and straightforward, almost to a fault as far as being straightforward. And I think that people would like that in their elected officials. They want them to be honest and straightforward. They don't want them to take a poll before they state their position on something. They want their elected officials to try to do what's right, to try to protect them. For the last 13 years or more in public service, that's what I've tried to do, and as Attorney General, that's what I would do.
The National Instant Background Check should be in place January 1st, but if it's not, would you, like Winston Bryant, conduct background checks on gun purchases?
Well, the There is a mechanism set up to do that, and should it be taken over November the 28th, as it's supposed to be by the federal government, that's appropriate. But there is no authority in Arkansas law that allows the Attorney General to do background checks. We don't have the authority to do that. I don't think that it's appropriate for the Attorney General to do it, because I don't think that legally we have the authority to.
You've already mentioned your victims' rights stance, and you've done quite a bit for sexual assault victims and as well as other programs. Do you plan on expanding these once you get to Attorney General?
Absolutely. And that's partly because of as a mother, and having protected or tried to protect my own children as a prosecutor, seeing over and over again children who are molested by people within their own family, and dealing with the frustrations as we have in different cases where the mother and the grandmother would rather have the father's paycheck than have him stop molesting the 6-year-old child, and knowing that all we could get was probation and then try to revoke him later. Seeing how tragic the situation was in Lone Oak when we could identify over 50 young men who had been raped by a Boy Scout leader over a period of over 20 years. I have dealt with the tragedy both in my area and in other areas, and I know how bad it is. And pedophiles will reoffend if they're the serious offenders, and so tracking them is a problem that our sheriffs are facing. At first, classifying them as to 1, 2, or 3 according to how serious the offender is, and then tracking them. And that is something that the Attorney General's office can do, can assist with in the outreach program, which assists crime victims. There are a lot of things that you could do to protect people, to protect innocent children. And yes, this is something that is very important to me.
The Attorney General's office handles a number of aspects related to the state and to state agencies. One in particular is the Consumer Protection Division, and under Attorney General Bryant, it's been pretty aggressive. What would you do to enhance that department, or is there another program within the AG's office that you think that's going to be the one you're going to tackle first?
There are 8 divisions, as I said, and 5 of those deal with criminal matters or peripherally deal with criminal matters. And the consumer protection is one, because you're protecting consumers from fraud generally, and that is an important area of what the Attorney General does to protect the people of the state of Arkansas. And yes, I would continue that aggressive program. The Consumer Protection Hotline could do what the governor's hotline for a very short time did, as far as having fraud in state government, fraud in the business areas reported. There appears to be a lack of confidence in the confidentiality of that Consumer Protection Hotline within the AG's office, and I would want to restore that and give people an opportunity to call in and make our government and make our businesses do better. So I think consumer protection is important. I would want to expand it to cover financial abuse by those people who are in a fiduciary relationship, and this comes again from personal experience. I prosecuted a Star City attorney who had bilked his clients, most of whom were elderly, out of nearly $8 million. He gambled it away at the Mississippi casinos. I saw firsthand what financial abuse of the elderly was. And so that's an important part of what I would do as Attorney General to protect another area of the vulnerable in our society, the senior citizens, from financial abuse, from telemarketer scams, from people who come in and want to offer a contract to re-roof their house and then rip them off. So I want to do everything I can to protect that segment of society.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We've run out of time. I'm Lisa Stegall.
And I'm Amanda Black. Thank you.
Thank you.
The SAU Report is a production of broadcast journalism students in the Department of Theater and Mass Communication at Southern Arkansas University in Magnolia.